So very briefly, last year's legislative session. FAIR was there in, I think, in record numbers. There were a number of bills that were presented. There were a couple that we actually supported, one that passed and one that did not, which was new. And then the ones that we did not support, I know Halloween restriction was one, and I want to say there was at least one other that we fought.
Community-based organizations.
That's right, that was it, the community-based organizations. Those were two bills that got introduced where further restrictions were being proposed. There are states out there where that basically the very same Halloween restriction has passed because there was nobody there to fight it. But we were there pointing out all the problems en masse with personal stories, and it was killed. You know, it got heard in both chambers and didn't go anywhere because, and I do have this on authority from at least one committee chair, that it was because we were there that made that big of a difference. The Halloween one was no participation in any sort of Halloween activity.
As Conaway said, no Halloween means
no Halloween. So it's like, you know, okay, you can't have a party in your home for your kid. I mean, by that definition, you know, it was just really broad. So we stopped that. The other one, again, was community-based organizations. We currently, people on the registry, as you, I'm sure all know, aren't allowed on school property, you know, without, you know, permission from, you know, somebody higher up. And they were trying to expand that to include any community-based organization that catered to children, period. So at any time. So in other words, you could have, say, a good example might be a church that has a youth event once a year. Or they play volleyball sometimes, you know, on Saturdays. Off limits, if this bill had gone through. It was badly written. Original intent was just to keep them out of the Y, but they're already kept out of the Y. So it was a moot point. So we went in there, again, pointed out all the flaws in that, one by one, pointed out specific examples of some organizations that, especially charitable organizations that do things for children, but they also, you know, they provide support for people who are registered. And they would not be able to provide that support. You know, so a lot of that got brought up. So that's another one that we assisted in killing.
There was also a bill on eliminating donated credits for people who are incarcerated.
Yeah, there was a dim credit bill.
Get good time credits.
Yeah, and those have been introduced in the past. So good time credits was one, the voting one comes back every year, the voting one is there's just one or two people that introduce it. We have to be there and speak on it, but the main issue is they're not allowed there every other day of the year. Why should they be allowed to go onto the school property on election day? There must be some reason. That's the logic. And the idea is you can only vote absentee if this was to pass. And we're there every year. The ACLU is there every year. The public defenders are there every year. And we keep telling them, you can't do that. And fortunately, there's really not much support in that particular, it's the only time that I get to go speak in something other than the judiciary committees, because that one's dealt with in Ways and Means, so I get to have a different audience. But we just go in there and we tell them what's about, and several of us were there and spoke. So that one, as usual, died. The two that we supported, the one that, I'll do the one that passed first, was what we called for short the Kidnapping Bill. And this was correcting a problem, and Nancy Forster actually helped get this one introduced. When they changed the law in 2010, kidnapping was already on the books as a potential sex offense. And when they changed it all over to the Adam Walsh Act, it just kind of got scooped up into that, and they didn't really notice that there were a lot of people that had garden variety kidnapping that suddenly found themselves having to register because that particular statute just ended up as a registrable offense. So there were people, in the Senate, someone came in to testify who was, he'd been a drug dealer, and he'd kept somebody in his car as part of a, kind of like held him hostage for a while so they'd pay up for the drugs. And that was just one of his offenses. He ended up in jail because of, the drug charges themselves, but kidnapping was one of the things he pled guilty to. And he got out, turned his life around, he got married, he was moving on, and as a result of the changes in laws in 2010, he got put onto the registry. And he was able to go in there without all the baggage that people with an actual sex offense have, and was able to stand up there and say, it's ruining my life, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, I've got this issue, I've got that issue. And even the people that hate sex offenders were going up to him afterward going, oh, we've got to fix this, I promise you we'll get this fixed. So that one sailed on through. We certainly supported it, obviously, because anybody coming off the registry is good for us. And that one did get on through. And that will take effect, I guess, in another few days, because they tend to go into effect on October 1st. Yeah. And then the last one that we supported was introduced by the Sex Offender Advisory Board, and that was the what we called the statutory bill. These are our little short names. They're long, complicated things when you read them. And it was aimed at defining, how to sum this up quickly, kind of defining a statutory offense, because currently in Maryland there isn't really clarity on what would be considered a statutory. That's where you've got, it's consensual, but otherwise it's illegal for one reason or another. So to define that, number one, and then create a way that, especially for the young people, the Romeos and Juliets, as you frequently hear them called, don't end up on a public registry as a result of that. We got it actually passed in the Senate and then stalled in the House, so that one didn't get through. The message for me in that was that I assumed that since the Department of Public Safety was behind it and it had already passed the Senate, that it was a done deal, and I didn't really follow up with it and push on it as hard as I should have. I also found out, leading into a little bit Sex Offender Advisory Board, that the advisory board also didn't push it as hard as they could have, and they felt, I'm not going to say they felt bad about it exactly, they were annoyed that that it didn't get through. And now it's an election year, so they're not real sure they're going to reintroduce it this year because it's more controversial. They were trying to do things like expand the age range. Right now, like I say, it's about 4 years to, believe it or not, 10 or under 10. And then defining it a little differently, and again, then having a private registry for persons with that. Their goal in it was not, we feel bad for these young people, where you got a 20-year-old and they've got a 15-year-old girlfriend. That wasn't their issue. Their issue was that because the registry is so feared, a lot of people, and they were saying like four a month or something, I mean, a lot of people are now, with their good lawyers, are pleading down from what would be a 3rd degree or a 4th degree sex offense of some sort to 2nd degree assault. Because of course if it's 2nd degree assault, it's not a sex offense, and they don't have to register. And they say some of these people need the counseling, some of these people need to be watched as sex offenders because we know they're pleading down. Now you can argue how many of those people that actually is, but that's their reasoning. That was what they were doing it for, and they didn't push that. And so people were thinking, oh, it's a law that's making things easier for sex offenders, and so in the House it got pushed back. So they're looking at ways to get over that and maybe reintroduce it, if not this coming year, maybe the following year. Which does lead me into a little bit with the last meeting of the Sex Offender Advisory Board. They aren't meeting as often. The advisory board, its main focus over the past year, and they kind of did a recap at this meeting, their main focus has been on creating a process for people who have been sentenced to lifetime supervision, which is a new charge that people can now get, which is totally separate from probation and parole, totally separate from registry. It's, lifetime supervision is a whole new category.
A sentence?
Yes. You can be sentenced to, that can be a,
Lifetime supervised
yeah, it can be a
probation.
part, it's not probation.
Admission
No.
that it's a punishment.
Yes, yes. Lifetime supervision would be a part of your sentence. It's assigned by a judge, but it's a whole different ball of wax than whatever your probation and parole is, and it would start once your probation and parole has finished. So, but here's the catch, and when this was introduced the same year as AWA, so this was one of the bills that we worked with back in 2010, and we decided not to fight it because, number one, there were only about 10 of us at the time, and number two, there's a process for appeal. And I think it's after 5 years, I don't know if you know that, but I think it's after 5 years, a person can appeal to drop the lifetime supervision. And the way it was written in the law, frankly, they could do it every year after that. So there's a way to get off of lifetime supervision built into that law, unlike registration. So their work this past year, the advisory board, has been on developing, okay, what's that process? What do they need to show? What's the process for getting an appeal? And so that's where a lot of the focus has been over the past year. They had, how much of do they want to do an evaluation, a psychiatric evaluation? Is it just going to be strictly on, any new charges? What are they going to create for that? So that's what they spent a lot of this past year doing. So they presented at the meeting some slight changes in language. They're going to change it from every year to every 2 years because they said by the time you finish it the first year, so they're going to try to put that through. They have to take that through the legislature. So that we're likely to see this year, where they're going to tweak the language for lifetime supervision to say every 2 years you can appeal. And they changed the language of what's needed. The original language was kind of vague, and I'm going to quote it badly, I'm sure, but it basically said that the person appealing would have to show that they are no longer at risk to reoffend, which is an impossible standard, and the advisory board knows that. So they were trying to come up with a wording that would appease those who want to make sure that they're not a risk or a low risk, but be realistic so that someone could actually have hope of getting off if they appealed. And they did come up with a better language that left it up to the judge to make the decision as opposed to somebody that's supervising or a person who's doing the evaluation. Because the person doing the evaluation of risk is not going to want to stick their neck out and say, you're not a risk. I don't think even Mr. Berlin of the Berlin Clinic is going to put down on there, this person will never reoffend again, because what if you screw up, right? So they won't do it. It's just a liability thing. But if you leave in the judge's hand, then the judge can say, okay, I've deemed this person to be minimal risk. You've got a microphone, so pick that up in a sec. So that's the direction they've moved the language. So they feel like it's realistic. People might actually have a chance if they get put on lifetime supervision. I don't think we couldn't have anybody much that has it because they have to be sentenced to it and they have to have completed whatever their probation and parole. So I don't even know if we've got anybody actually in that process yet, but they're ready now, or almost ready at that point. So Robin, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you said they've come up with a somewhat reasonable standard. and they've put it back on the judge, it seems to me like it's an unrealistic prediction for even a judge to make. It's like saying, the judge saying, well, it's not going to rain tomorrow.
Yeah, the wording, I'm not able to translate really well, but it leaves some wiggle room for the judge. And the advantage with the judge is that they can do it and they can step aside. And so, apart from, of course, we know sometimes there's political issues even with judges. So it's not perfect, but it's much better than putting the burden on the person doing the appeal to show they're not a risk. So it's shifted back to a more realistic. My hope is that, like based on some of the things David was saying, that we might be able to take some of that model that they're developing, and if there's ever a way to suggest, can we get some more people off the registry, that we might be able to use something like that as a model if they find that it works. So that's my hope there. I think that's about, there were some other things. I could point out the one thing that came up at that meeting that got me really ticked off, actually, and I called Bob up to vent, was that there was another community person. When you attend these board meetings, I attend simply as an observer, as a member of the community. But they're usually nice to me and they let me, ask a question or make a comment every once in a while. There was another person there at this meeting, and she had a huge stack of papers all about why the statutory bill was a bad idea and there were all kinds of problems with it. She spoke, but in amongst all that stack of papers, there was one sheet of paper that said, don't vote for this bill. So it was obviously handed out during the session. Don't forward this bill. Link between RSOL, FAIR, and NAMBLA. And then it went on to discuss the connections, because FAIR is an affiliate of RSOL. And, so then there was this back and forth. Law enforcement called them the new NAMBLA. And I looked at that, and I thought, okay, I'm pissed. But the interesting thing was she ended up discrediting herself. I didn't have to do anything because she was over the top. Elizabeth Bartholomew, who most of you know is kind of in charge of the registry, was also there. And when it was her turn to speak, she said a little bit, but when she finished, Elizabeth Bartholomew lit into that woman like I have never seen her light into anybody before. She was pissed. You have associated us with that group, with NAMBLA. To think that we would do something like that. She said, that is unprofessional and uncalled for. She just liked it in front of the entire board. And I said, I don't think I have to take umbrage at anything because she's gone and done it for me. And it is, but the one thing that it does tell me is that we always need to be on guard about how we present ourselves. We have to be totally professional. We can't afford to go in and say anything that sounds like age of consent issues. It does get presented frequently. We did have one person stand up for that voting thing and said, well, nobody's against this thing except for the pedophile lobby, and pointed back at us, But you stand up and you present your case and you're rational, you're logical, you're professional looking, you don't go up there in your jeans and your t-shirts, and we have credibility, and she didn't. So we came out ahead on that. And that's all I'll say. Did anybody have any questions?
Regarding legislative issues?
Yeah, legislative or advisory board, or did I talk you all to sleep? Yeah, thought so. Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I can just piggyback on that a little bit. Keep a close watch with FAIR for any, like last year we had listed, here's a hearing is going to be held on this issue, please try and come. Those of you who are fortunate enough to actually have a job that has leave, if you have liberal leave or something, keep one in your back pocket for when that day comes, because hopefully you'll have a few weeks notice, but you will have to take a day off to come down to Annapolis. So, I mean, that's just something you might want to bear in mind. It's an empowering experience to testify and feel like a citizen and not a criminal. Barry.
Brenda, could you take 2 minutes and explain what the advisory board is?
Well,
There's people here that don't know what it is.
okay, sure.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. Somebody time. Okay, watch the clock.
I am.
All right. Sex Offender Advisory Board, put together by the governor, who assigns people from various professions. And the idea is that they decide how to manage the sex offender population and advise the governor on how to manage those laws. In some states, they have a little more power. Other states, they're more of a puppet. There's about, I don't know how many people, 12? Not sure. But anyway, there's about 12 or 15 people on there. And their focus, again, is on what the governor wants. The governor asked them about this statutory thing. So they provide that advisory piece. Our advisory board is if you look at it, it seems to be kind of skewed toward public safety, so there's a little more public safety folks. But they actually have a very supportive, I think overall supportive and, what's the other word I'm looking for, sympathetic viewpoint as to the difficulties, with being on the registry and those kind of issues. And there's a lot of treatment providers that are involved with it, that really work hard. So we've tried to be at every meeting, at least, FAIR's tried to be there at every meeting, even if we don't speak, just to say, hey guys, remember these are human beings. I'm here to represent the human beings. And people come in and they go, who are those people over there? And so, well, those are they're sex offender, advocates. And it keeps them on their toes just that we're there. So
Who can attend?
it's open to the public. So people can come if they are interested in coming.
You can find out when it is.
If you find out when it is, I didn't get this last one posted. I would encourage people to come if they don't mind being. It might end up getting kind of annoyed sometimes, depending on what the topics are. It's more of I see it as more of a lobbying and PR kind of thing. It's not a place where you can go and testify, as that woman that I mentioned tried to do. She tried to testify against a bill at this committee. They didn't like that. It's not what they're there for, the board. So, but if you feel your calling is to be kind of an ambassador, even if all you're doing is sitting there, looking handsome and respectable or pretty and respectable, that's who we would need at that board. We don't need like tons of people like we would need at General Assembly. So, yeah. Yes?
Will you post those dates on there?
I'm going to try to. They don't always announce them real well, and this one came up kind of short notice for me, and then I need to get somebody who's willing to help me post things, because sometimes what happens is that I just get overwhelmed with stuff, and then I don't get those dates up there. And right now, that's one of the things that's on my docket, and I need to get somebody else to to take it over because I forget.
How can someone help you with that?
Well, I've actually maybe have a volunteer that can help me with it now. I need an administrative assistant kind of person who can, when something comes up that needs to be on the calendar, I can say, here, this needs to go on the calendar, and they can put it up. Because otherwise it drifts down in my email inbox. So, that, and then help me remind me to send out announcements. Yeah, so it's kind of an administrative assistant position. It could be almost entirely online. So let me know if you might want to help with that.
And there's always positions open throughout
Always.
FAIR. There's a good core of us that are doing a lot of the work, but we really could use more help just with the littlest things.
Okay.
Couple things left on the agenda. I don't know how far we're going to get into increasing membership and fundraising. I mean,
If you want to mention the Halloween thing.
Right, I'm going to do that. Yeah. Well, fundraising is something that we're always talking about. It's tough for a lot of us who don't know if they're going to make rent next month. But there is an idea we're kicking around. I hope I'm not stepping too far forward on it, but we were discussing it earlier today, about putting together a letter that we can send out to friends and associates who know our situation, are sympathetic with our cause, but for one reason or another don't really want to get involved in this group, but be willing to support us and be a benefactor, and work out some way that we could send our brochure, say, hey, you know me, you know my situation. You know, if you'd like to donate to this organization, it'd be greatly appreciated. That way, rather than just trying to get all our money from the core membership, which is a very Lutheran thing, apparently, that they don't ask for outside contributions. But it's something we should think about, and we'll discuss more at the next meeting. So bear that in mind. Halloween is coming up. It's rearing its ugly head, not too in a little bit more than a month. And I just want to, does anyone have gotten any clue from, if you're still on probation, you'll be required to maybe do some silly shenanigans or whatever. If you are held in a lock-in, I would encourage you to let us know, and we can send you a packet of flyers to take if you're willing to distribute them. I mean, we have a captive audience when the police decide to round up a bunch of people. They did it for everybody on the registry in Frederick when second time I got out, back in 2010, and that's how I learned about FAIR. Someone was handing out Xerox copies of the brochure, and that's how I found out about it. So if you find yourself in that kind of a situation, please let us know, and we'll get you some brochures that you can take along. Take with you as well some brochures with you if you'd like to have to hand to people that you may know that would be interested in an organization. If you're in sex offender therapy, I am, you have other people in your group that you might want to let spread the word about. I tell people in my individual group, and they all get excited, and then if I don't give them a piece of paper, I don't know they're going to quite get the message through of who to contact. Tentatively, our next meeting is going to be held on November 10th, which is the second Saturday of the month, and we may have some idea maybe of what's coming up in the legislature. We might even, if we're really lucky, find out what happened to the Court of Appeals. We'll be having that on the east side of Balmer, at the Dundalk, whatever. It's all Balmer to me. I don't know.
The name of the library.
It's all, but you know where it is? We had a meeting there. When did we have a meeting there? Back in the spring, or? Okay, so some of you may know that meeting place. We're going to try to have meetings spread around, but in the same sort of location, so we don't have to get lost every time we come to a meeting. So I'll encourage everybody who's not on the website to please get on and post. Post what your feelings were about this meeting. For those who didn't come, then they'll, it might encourage them to come to a future meeting. And then we'll have another. Hopefully, we'll be having. Last year we had a holiday party in Germantown, whatever. We're going to hold it there again this year. I haven't got the date set on that, so we had a really good turnout last year, so I know there's at least 35 people that know where it is. So that's the future plan. We'll be having, now there's also some discussion that Brenda's had about come January when the House comes back into, the Maryland legislature starts up again, that we may want to have a field trip. And you, of course, would involve having to take a day off, and we go down to the House, check the place out, talk to people who are our representatives, talk to people that are on these committees, do a little lobbying on our own. So that's something that's down in the future just to be aware of and to bear that in mind.
Okay. And I have one more thing.
And I'm going to pardon?
I was just going to say, first timers here again?
Who was here the first time?
For first timers, we also do a summer picnic.
Yep.
That we could use more people at, but we've had some good attendance at it. Good time was had by all. So it's not just business. We try to, get together as many times as we can. I don't know, what county are you in? Baltimore County. Montgomery County. A lot of the counties have their own, I guess you call them committees or subgroups that get together once a month. I don't know, how many are in the state now? Mine's going to form next month again. We lost our place down on the Eastern Shore where we used to meet because the place closed up. So we've been shopping around for a new place to start ours. But find out if there's a local fair group that gets together in your county, and half the counties have them maybe.
Very few have. Very few have them now. That's why we're having the state meetings. But it is important that you have them out there on the beautiful Eastern Shore, and Robin has them up there in the hills of Hagerstown and further out in Washington County.
Yeah, and Howard has one in Central.
Howard
Basically
has
just
one.
the three right now.
All right.
Yeah.
But seek out your local, because
But-
if you can't make the statewide meetings all the time, at least you'll have something that's a little closer by to attend on a monthly basis.
And if you know of any members that live near you, I mean, get together. You know, we don't, like they would say in AA, two people make a meeting. So, I mean, that's all it takes when two people get together. So, Brenda's going to finish up, and I want to thank you all for your attention and your kindness, and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll
Okay.
see you next month, I hope.
Yep, okay. And David had one more thing that he wanted to bring up, but he had to leave at 4:30. It's okay, but I'm here.
Oh, you got it, huh?
I have it. He handed it off to me. And I'm not going to go into great depth, but it does have to do with legislative. Maybe not this year, but as a long-term project, one of the things that we'd like to do is actually start introducing legislation. If we can find a sponsor, you have to find somebody in the government to sponsor you. And one that's near and dear to David's heart, and I know a lot of other people have had issues with this, is when a place of worship no longer is not comfortable having a registrant in their congregation. This ended up being an issue for me, even without a registrant, because they start seeing it as a liability issue. Others have had, issues where their insurance company says no. I mean, so even if the church itself is open, sometimes they're not. The case we wanted to bring and to change the law, or to see about changing the law, is that the way the law is worded right now, it's very clear how you can get permission to go on school property. You go talk to if you need to pick up your kid from school or whatever, then, there's a path you can take to hopefully get that permission. With a church that happens to have a school as a part of the property, and a lot of them have a daycare during the week or something like that, there is nothing in the law right now that clearly states if they're not meeting on a Sunday, it's okay. And so some churches are faced with, well, is this person going to get violated if they attend our church because we have this thing during the week? Because there's nothing clear. And so some of them have said, and this actually happened in David's instance, we think you better go find someplace else because we're really concerned about this issue. We don't want you to get in trouble by attending our church because we happen to have a school or something on the property Monday through Friday. So we're wanting to introduce legislation that corrects that. And the sample of what we might put is on this, which I'll pass around to you all. What we'd like to ask of you is if you have any stories where this has happened to you or someone where you've not been able to attend a place of worship, and potentially relates to that, get in touch with me or with David and let us know your story. Type it up if you want to and send it in, or call us or whatever. Also, if you are a member of a church or synagogue or wherever you might happen to attend, and you know someone, your priest, your whoever, depending on where you're attending, your imam, anyway, whoever you are, and you feel that they are sympathetic, they've worked with you, they do support you, or your loved one, and they would be willing to come and testify as to the difficulties this puts their organization in. Have them get in touch with us or give us their name if they're willing. Because we've got to show broad community support and a wide range of people in all different walks of life if we want to introduce something. Chances are this year we're just going to be building up that support. We probably won't be introducing it. It's also an election year. But by the following year, maybe we'll be ready to actually introduce a bill.